Gospel of John, chapter 6. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. It was a dark and stormy night. That's my sermon title. It was a dark and stormy night. That's actually the opening sentence, the opening line of a novel published in 1830 by the name of Paul Clifford. And it's come to be the standard example of poor, cliched, trite, melodramatic writing. It was a dark and stormy night. It's the first line in the novel Snoopy is forever trying to write. Come on, how many of you remember Peanuts? And there's Snoopy, and he's up on top of his doghouse with his little typewriter, and he's always trying to write this novel. And the first line is always, "It was a dark and stormy night." It's a recurring theme in that cartoon series. Yeah, and so he's up there on his doghouse starting his novel. It was a dark and stormy night. And along comes Lucy. She's bossy. She's a know-it-all. And Lucy comes along and she tells Snoopy, "That's a terrible way to begin a story. It's so trite. Once upon a time. That's the way all good stories begin. Do that. Begin your story with once upon a time." Once upon a time, it was a dark and stormy night. Anyway, so it's the standard example of trite, cliche, poor writing. But I don't know, because I was looking at this list put together by, who was it? The American Book Review. They're respected. And they had their list of 100 best opening lines of novels, and that one came in number 22. So apparently some people think, I think it's pretty good. It's not bad. It was a dark and stormy night. You know, it's become a cliche now, but I don't know. Back in 1830, maybe that got your attention. It's the opening line of A Wrinkle in Time. I know Perry likes that one. Of course, Madeleine L'Engle is kind of doing that with a twinkle in her eye that she starts her novel with. It was a dark and stormy night, but I still don't think it's that bad. Well, just for the fun of it, I put together my top 10 list of best first lines for a novel. I like to read. Perry likes to read. We're readers in our home, and we like to read novels. And so I put together my own. This is my own, the top 10 best first lines of novels, going from the shortest to the longest. That's the order they're in. So number 1, "Call Me Ishmael." Who knows what that's from? Anybody know? Come on. Got some literate people here. Moby Dick, Herman Melville. Yes, you should read that. You won't, but it's okay. Number 2, "All This Happened, More or Less." That's the opening line of Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. Coincidentally, Perry just finished reading that, I think yesterday or the day before. "He was an old man who fished alone." Well, you can guess that one. That's the old man in the sea. "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man." Notes from Underground by my good pal Fyodor Dostoevsky. I know Eric Stark read that and he liked it. Number 5, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." That's a great start. And of course, that's our good friend, Brother Tolkien. "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Oh, that's a famous one. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Of course, that is the opening of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. That novel also has one of the most famous endings. It ends with, "'Tis a far, far better thing that I do than I've ever done. 'Tis a far, far better rest I go to than I've ever known." And all the stuff in between is pretty good too. It's a great book. Number 7, "Mother died today," or maybe yesterday. I can't be sure. That's The Stranger by Albert Camus. Number 8, "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. George Orwell's 1984, the sales of which I just read are up 6,000%. We're all a little worried about Big Brother looking over our shoulder. Number 9, there was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. That's a great opening line. That's C.S. Lewis and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And number 10, all happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That's a very famous one. That's Leo Tolstoy opening of Anna Karenina. In the first service, I said War and Peace. But ever alert first row sitter Perry Zahnd said, what? Come on, Brian, don't be so stupid. You know better than that. It's Anna Karenina. Anna Karenina. And she's right. I did know that, but I made a mistake. Okay. Well, we're not going to do literary analysis here this morning, but we're looking at the 5th of the 7 signs in John's gospel. John gives us 7 miracle accounts, but he never calls them miracles, he calls them signs. Matthew, Mark, and Luke give us dozens, but John only gives 7, and the whole point is that he wants us to see these signs as pointing to Jesus in such a way that we will believe in Jesus in a right way and have life in his name. And in the telling of the 5th sign, it must be said, it was a dark and stormy night. So that's the title for the message, and let's revisit the story. It had been a beautiful day, and Jesus had been on the eastern side, the opposite side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus' ministry base was Capernaum. Bethsaida and Chorazin and all those cities were there on the west side, but Jesus has gone over to the other side, to the eastern side, to the far side. Jesus is over there. And the multitudes, because they're so hungry for his word, have gathered to him. And Jesus there sees that they have nothing to eat. And he says, what shall we do that we might feed these? And one disciple says, it was Philip. He said, well, it's going to cost us $12,000 if everybody has just a little. And then Andrew said, well, there's a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what are that among so many? But Jesus was just testing them all. And you know how he has them all sit down, and he breaks and blesses, and he gives, and he reaches into the infinite, and he feeds them all. The reaction of the crowd, though, was they sought to come and take him by force and make him a king. Now, the thing is, Jesus is the king. That's what Messiah means. That's what Jesus is. He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He comes to be king and to reign and to rule. Why does he then slip away from them and refuse to be made king? Well, it's because they came to make him, to take him by force, to make him their forceful king, to lead their forces, because they were still dominated by the paradigm of scarcity. And they still thought, you know, there's not enough to go around. And so what we'll do is we'll have this miracle working king to lead our forces to make sure we get the biggest slice of the pie. And Jesus says, I'm not going to play that game. My kingdom doesn't operate by trying to fight over scarcity. My kingdom operates by tapping into the beauty of the infinite. And so Jesus slips away from the crowd, goes up into the mountains, and he prays. He sends his disciples, the 12, he says, I want you guys to go on ahead. I'll catch up. You go on ahead. You go back to Capernaum. I'm going to be praying. I'll see you later. I think Jesus is setting them up. I think Jesus knows what he intends to do, but they don't know. Now, the Sea of Galilee is 12 miles long and 7 miles wide. They're going across from east back to the west side. It's 7 miles. Now, if you walk, you have to go all the way up around the northern part. It's very long. By far, the easiest, quickest way to get from the west side of the Sea of Galilee to the east side and to the east to the west is by boat. And it's a 7-mile journey. So they're on the east side. They're going back home to Capernaum. And Jesus says, don't worry about me. I'll find my own way over. They're probably assuming that he's going to walk around the sea, and they'll see him sometime tomorrow afternoon. They get into the boat. It's already nightfall. Darkness is coming quickly. They begin their 7-mile journey across the Sea of Galilee, and the wind comes up. And the sea gets rough, and it's choppy, and it's dark. It was a dark and stormy night. You know, what kind of illumination, what kind of lamps do they have? I don't know. Illumination, what do they have? They don't have much. You know, they have some sort of lantern or something like that, but it's stormy, it's windy, it's at nighttime, it's dark, and they're trying to make their way across. They're straining at the oars. They're trying to make their way across. But there's a sense of danger. There's a sense of foreboding. They're not entirely comfortable. They're in a very small boat. And the sea is rough. And if the storm gets any worse, they could be in danger. And there's this sense of we're not exactly sure where we are because we can't really tell where we are. And they're trying to make a difficult passage of this sea in the middle of a dark and stormy night. And that's when Jesus comes to them. Jesus comes to them walking on the sea. I tell you, if it's not the turning of water into wine, this is my favorite miracle. I love this miracle. Jesus, in a dark and stormy night on a turbulent sea, Jesus is walking on the water. I love this miracle. There's a sense of elegance and nonchalance about it. I mean, it's wonderful the way Jesus comes to them. He's elegant, but he's nonchalant, he's comfortable. There's this dramatic scene of men struggling in a somewhat dangerous situation in a dark and stormy night, and Jesus just is out for a stroll. And he's coming to them. He's walking on the water. I like this miracle because we can all imagine walking on water. We know what it's like to walk, and we can imagine walking on water. We just can't do it. By the way, how many of you have ever tried to walk on water? Anybody ever tried it? Yeah, there's a few people going, yeah, I tried it. Didn't work out, did it? No. Maybe, though, I wonder, maybe we were always supposed to be able to walk on water. We just haven't learned how. Maybe it's like swimming. You just got to learn how. You got to be taught. You got to take some lessons. Maybe in the age to come, Jesus will give water walking lessons. Well, here's how you do it. Maybe we'll all learn how to, take Red Cross lessons and learn how to walk on water. You never know. But anyway, Jesus comes in the dark and stormy night to the disciples struggling in their boat. And all they know is they see a figure. This is impossible to wrap your mind around. You're in this boat. It's night. It's stormy. It's dark. And you perceive a human figure floating, walking. I mean, how do you describe it? Because, humans can't walk on water, but something like a human is moving across the top of the waves, moving directly towards your boat, and they are frightened, and you would be too. There would be such cognitive dissonance. You would know. And how do you process that? What's going on here? Matthew and Mark tell us that what they thought it was a ghost, which is what you would think too. And you say, well, I don't believe in ghosts. You would then. I mean, what else are they to think? Are we expecting the disciples to go, oh, yeah, it's probably Jesus? I mean, it's not entered their mind that someone's going to walk on water. And yet that's what's happening. Someone's walking on something. I think that probably what was going through their mind is, oh my gosh, we're so close to death that the ghosts are already appearing. The Grim Reaper's right out there. And they cry out in their terror, in their panic, and they say, it's a ghost. And Jesus says, no, it's me. Don't be afraid. And they were so relieved, right? I mean, that's a relief. It's not a ghost. It's not the Grim Reaper. It's not death itself. It's Jesus. And they were relieved, and it says they were glad, and they were glad to receive Jesus into the boat. And Jesus immediately gets into the boat. And they're so glad. They're still, remember John tells us here that they had been traveling for 3 or 4 miles. Remember, the sea is 7 miles wide at this point. So they've gone 3 or 4. Let's just split the difference. Let's say they've gone 3.5. They're right in the middle. They're right in the middle of the sea. In the middle of the night. In the middle of the storm. And Jesus comes to them. At first they're frightened. Jesus says, it is I. Do not be afraid. They're glad to receive him into the boat. And I think for a moment they just, they're so relieved that Jesus is with them. That they're not being haunted by ghosts. And everything's going to be all right. Jesus is in the boat. They still have, they're still in the middle of the sea, in the middle of storm, in the middle of the night. But Jesus is with them, and that changes everything. Amen. They received Jesus in, and no sooner has Jesus got into the boat and sat down, all of a sudden, bump. What's that? What's that? They realize that they're at the shore. Now, wait a minute. Jesus When Jesus got in the boat, they were in the middle of the sea. Only halfway to their destination. Still another 3 or 4 miles to go. But as soon as Jesus got in and sat down, they received him. Then they're right there at Capernaum. That's strange. That's mysterious. That's wonderful. I can imagine them just being completely confused. What happened, Jesus? Maybe Jesus says, I don't know. Shortcut, I guess. I don't know. They were right where they were going. I love this story. It's not Jesus doing tricks. It's not even, the point isn't that it's a miracle, although of course it is miraculous. The point is it's a sign. But as a sign, what does it point to? Remember, the purpose of the 7 signs is to inform our faith in Jesus so that we'll believe in Jesus in a right way and have life because of that. So we see Jesus walking on water on the rough sea on a dark and stormy night. It's a sign. What does the sign point to? Well, in many ways it points to this, that Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. Now let's work on how the sign points to that Jesus is Lord. The first thing you need to understand is how the Jewish world viewed the sea. The Jewish people were not a seafaring people. They were not like the Phoenicians, great masters of the sea, or the Greeks. They were also great for sailing the seas, or even the Egyptians who were very accomplished. The Jewish people, the Israelites, they were not a seafaring people. They were a stay-at-home bunch. They weren't wanting to go out onto the waves, onto the oceans. They weren't building big ships. Yes, they fished there in the Sea of Galilee, but that's pretty simple, pretty basic, pretty tame. And the Jewish view of the sea was that it was one of dread. They dreaded the sea, and it became, in Jewish imagery, an emblem of chaos and the source of evil. That's why, for example, in the book of Revelation, which is fully informed with Jewish symbols, that's why in the new earth, there's no more sea. It's not literal. It's not, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to swim with the dolphins after all because there's going to be no ocean. No, it's a symbol. What's it a symbol of? It's a symbol that, because the sea is where all the monsters in the book of Revelation come from. Well, it's a symbol that the very capacity for the creation of evil is done away with in the new creation. There's not going to be any more evil coming up out of the seas because the source of evil itself has been dealt with. So the Jewish mind is that the ancient Jewish mind is that the sea is dreaded and it's the source of evil. Job, in his praise of God, says God tramples the waves of the sea. Notice how Job says that God tramples the waves of the sea. Not walks upon, but tramples. Because the sea itself is viewed as suspect and a source of evil, so God tramples on the waves of the sea. More significant is Daniel's vision of the beasts that come up out of the sea. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has a dream that is very significant. And Daniel says, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. It was a dark and stormy night. And 4 great beasts, monsters, came up out of the sea. So he's having a dream, and in his dream he sees the sea. And the sea is being troubled, and a wind is blowing, and the sea is rough, and it's churning. And then up out of this dark sea come 4 monstrous beasts. As you continue to read the vision and the interpretation of it, you discover that these beasts are empires, superpowers that rule the world and oppress people in the process. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Now, by the end of the vision, though, by the end of Daniel's dream, there appears the Son of Man, who comes up from earth into heaven in the clouds of heaven, is received before the Ancient of Days, and the Ancient of Days, that is Yahweh, gives the Son of Man dominion over all of these empires. So that the idea in the dream is that the Son of Man will prevail over empires and peaceably rule the nations. That forms the Jewish expectation of Messiah. Jesus calls himself over and over, 87 times, the Son of Man. Who is the Son of Man? He is the one that is going to rule over the empires and establish a government of peace upon the earth. Now look in Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 1. Keep all that in mind. That's background. That's background material that John wants you to have in mind. John assumes you know the Old Testament before you ever start reading his Gospel. John chapter 6, verse 1. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Okay, this is what sets the scene for both the feeding of the 5,000 and the miracle of Jesus walking on water. We're told that Jesus has left his normal habitat over there on the western side with Capernaum and Bethsaida and Chorazin, and has gone over to the other side, the eastern side. But he tells us, John does, that he's crossed the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. I want you to know that in the Gospel of John, nothing is accidental. John, I would love to ask John, how long did it take you to write your Gospel? And I would not be surprised one bit if he said, oh, I worked on that for 20 years. Because there's so much intricate detail. Every single word is carefully placed. John has filled it with all kinds of little clues and hints and symbols and signs and these little things that we can learn from. So nothing's there by accident. So it's significant that John tells us that the Sea of Galilee is also called the Sea of Tiberias. Let's talk about that. Who is Tiberias? Well, this is Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius was the Roman emperor from AD 14 to AD 37. So Tiberius became the Roman emperor when Jesus was a teenager. And Tiberius was the emperor all through Jesus' teenage years, his adult years, his ministry, and the first 7 years of the church. Now, the city of Tiberias, because there is a city of Tiberias built on the Sea of Galilee. It's still there. It's where we stay on our Israel tours. We stay 3 nights in the Galilee, and we stay in a hotel there right on the Sea of Galilee in the town of Tiberias, which is still there. Now, this town was only built in AD 20. And so this episode in John 6 is happening in probably AD 28, 29. So the city's only 8 or 9 years old. It was built by King Herod, the client king of the Roman Empire. It was a new city, completely constructed, a planned city. It was going to be, and it was the capital of the Roman Empire in Galilee. It housed the army in Galilee, a lot of the royal officials, and it was mainly populated by Gentiles. Few, if any, Jews lived there. So what's going on? And the city is named after the Roman emperor Tiberius. Because what's going on is we're getting a picture of the Roman Empire is taking over everything. And they're even changing the names of things. This body of water has been known as the Sea of Galilee for a couple of thousand years, but now they've changed it, and it's named after the empire. It's like when they changed the name of classic stadiums and ballparks to some corporate thing. You know what I mean? Anybody else hate that? I just hate it and I refuse to. I won't do it. I still call it Mile High, and I still call it Candlestick, and I still call it, whatever the name was. Well, the emperor and the empire is putting its mark on everything. In the world that Jesus is growing up in, living in, preaching in, doing his ministry in, the empire is swallowing up everything, and the name and the face of Tiberius Caesar is everywhere. Everywhere. It's ubiquitous. You can't get away from him. He's a beast. He's a monster. He's everywhere. He's swallowing everything up. He says, we're even going to rename the sea. We're going to call it after me, Tiberias. I have one of my, I have a denarius here with me. This is a denarius from that period of time. And this is what Jesus asked for when he said, well, show me a coin. And somebody handed him a denarius. And he said, look at that. Who is that fellow right there? Who is that? He said, well, that's Caesar. And it's Tiberias Caesar. And he says, well, give Caesar back his stuff, but give God his stuff. The truth is, though, once you give God what is God's, there's not much left for Caesar. That's part of the subtle thing that Jesus is doing there. But this coin's kind of been worn out. Somebody lost it, 2,000 years ago, and it ended up in an Israeli antique shop, and I got it and made it mine, and I like it. It's been through some rough times. Poor old Tiberias' face is almost worn away, but I can still see him there. There he is, old Tiberias. And so you get the picture of these empires that always want to put their mark on everything and rename everything and capture everything and swallow everything up. It's a little bit, this is a weak example, but it's a little bit like the frustration or the irritation I sense when I travel the world and see those golden arches everywhere. Now, I don't mind driving down the Belt Highway and seeing a dozen McDonald's. That's fine with me. But I really don't want to see them in Paris and Istanbul and New Delhi, but I do. They're just everywhere. Jerusalem. You don't need a McDonald's in Jerusalem. You really don't, but they're there. And it's just kind of, they're spreading everywhere. Well, this is the picture of Tiberias and the Roman Empire. They're everywhere. And most people either sink or swim in the sea of empire. They get down in that, and they're either a big fish and they eat everything up, or they're a little fish and they get eaten, and they're in that churning mess of empire, the dark seas that all the beasts come out of, and everybody either sinks or swims in it. But not Jesus. When Jesus comes, he walks on top of it. He's walking on top of the empire of Tiberias. He's walking on top of the Roman Empire. He's not down in there, sink or swim, eat or be eaten. Jesus is above it. Jesus is walking on the water of the Sea of Tiberias. And that's a sign that John wants you to see. If John was sitting here on the front row, he'd be waving his hanky, shouting, preach. Because he'd be happy that somebody saw that. Amen. So we don't have to sink or swim in the sea of empire like a bloodthirsty shark. We don't have to sink or swim in the empire like a drowning victim. We can walk with Jesus and stay above it. Because see, in the sea of empire, it's pretty much, it's either big fish or little fish. It's winners or losers. But winners and losers is a false category for Christians. We are not winners or losers. We're believers. And as believers, we believe there's a whole different way to journey through life. It's not sink or swim, eat or be eaten in the sea of empire. We can be above that, walk with Jesus on top of it. That's a sign that Jesus is Lord. This whole episode is a sign of how Jesus is Lord over the beasts of empire. But there's also a more personal way of reading the fifth sign. When it's a dark and stormy night in your own life, come on now, you're not alone. Jesus will come to you, and when Jesus comes to you, everything is going to be all right. Because there you are, trying to get somewhere in life. You feel like you need to get over there to Capernaum. Wherever you're trying to go, you have a goal, a destination, somewhere you want to get. And you've set out. But it's a dark and stormy night. And things are getting rough. And the sea's getting rough. The situation's rough. And you're trying your best. And you're hard at work at the oars. And blisters are on your hands. And it hurts. And you feel like you're trying to get somewhere, but you feel like you're stuck in the middle of nowhere. You're in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm. You begin to panic. You're seeing ghosts. You feel like you're not going to make it. You realize, I could drown in this situation. And then all of a sudden you hear a voice says, don't worry, it's me. I'm here. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Trying to get somewhere. It's a dark and stormy night. You're afraid of being swallowed up by the situation. You think you're seeing ghosts, and then you hear a voice say, it's me. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. And you're so relieved to hear the voice of Jesus and to know that he's not far away. He hasn't left you. He's right there with you. And so you gladly receive him into the situation, see. You let Jesus climb into that situation with you. Now, you're still in the middle of the situation, but you're suddenly relaxing. You've let go of the oars. Imagine this now. Jesus is getting in the boat with you. You've been straining at the oars for hours, and you've been so filled with fear, and your mind's running away with itself, and you're panicked. But when Jesus says, "It's me, don't be afraid," oh, Jesus, thank you. And you let go of the oars. You're still right in the middle of it. You're halfway. You're right in the middle of the situation. It's going to take hours, days, weeks, months, years, whatever to get there. But at least Jesus, because when Jesus shows up in your situation, it changes everything, doesn't it? And you're so relieved. Oh, Jesus is with me. And Jesus gets in and he sits right down next to you. He just grabs your knee and says, "It's going to be all right." And all of a sudden there's a bump. Bump. "What's that? What's that?" And Jesus, "Oh, I think we're here. We've arrived." Really? Sometimes what it really takes is inviting Jesus into the situation, and you stop trying and it happens. Anybody testify that sometimes that's the way it is? You've been struggling and straining and trying, and you're afraid and you're panicked, and then you cry out and Jesus is there and he says, "It's all right," and he gets on board, and you still don't know how you're going to get out of this. You still think you got a long way to go, but at least you're relaxed because Jesus is with you, and the next thing you know, you're through. You've crossed over. You're to the other side. You've arrived. And Jesus just shrugs and says, "Shortcut." Things happen. Good things happen. Amen.